Lent is the 40 days between Ash Wednesday and Easter. If you get the calendar out and start counting, you will notice that there are more than 40 days. That is because Sundays are not included. The good news for you, if you gave up chocolate for Lent, you can indulge on Sunday and technically not be cheating. Every Sunday is a mini Easter, not a day of penitence, but a day to celebrate resurrection, and so is not a part of Lent. These 40 days are meant to be a time of preparation leading up to Easter. It is a time to examine our lives to see where we need to make changes. Lent is the time for soul searching and going deeper in our reflections rather than quickly skimming the surface. It is a time to slow down and ask ourselves, what is the condition of our hearts? Where are the sharp and jagged edges that need to be smoothed? Where are the holes and the tattered places that need to be mended? What needs to be made new? Our Lent series is called With All Your Heart, and if we take this Lenten journey seriously and we do the work and reflection, on Easter Sunday, we will notice changes in our hearts. So we start with week 1, remembering. Remember with all your heart. The stories that we remember of God at work in our lives, God with us in the midst of hardships and beyond, those stories carry us forward. As we remember God's faithfulness in the past, we can be assured of it in the future. I want to invite you to remember the stories in your family as I share one from mine. I am amazed by the life of my husband Randy's grandmother, Letty. This woman knew hardship. She was born to Norwegian immigrants, Ole Olsen and Carrie Larson. You can't get much more Norwegian than that. Her mother was killed in a tornado when Letty was just 4 years old, and Letty miraculously survived. Her father worked for the railroad and was gone a lot, and so he just left her in the care of some cousins. She was brought up going to a Norwegian Lutheran church in rural Iowa, and her confirmation certificate is in Norwegian. Letty met her husband Rufus while she was working as a cook in a boarding house. He would come by and help her shuck peas, and no doubt that is how she learned English. They married and had 7 children, and 4 survived to adulthood. Now Rufus had a bad heart. My father-in-law said that you could hear the blood gurgling in his chest. Nowadays, he could have had surgery to correct it and led a pretty normal life, but that wasn't available then. He was only 41 years old when he collapsed in the kitchen and died. 2 years later, 15-year-old George, the oldest son, caught the Spanish flu, and in 3 days, he died. Olive, the oldest, had to be sent to Iowa City because that's where you had to go if you couldn't afford to pay for medical treatment. She sent a postcard home showing a picture of the hospital with an X marking the window where her room was. She died of tuberculosis the year after George died. 2 of the younger children, Bob and Alice, needed to have their tonsils removed, so they had to get on a train to go to Iowa City. Sterilization wasn't what it is today, and while they were there, they caught diphtheria and brought it home. Raymond, the baby, caught it, and he died. The article in the paper at the time said, "This bereaved mother is certainly entitled to and has the sympathy of the entire community, this being the 4th death in her immediate family in 4 years." I'm not sure how Letty managed to get out of bed in the morning, but she did. She took in laundry to support the family, and from stories I've heard, they lived on cornbread and whatever they could fish and hunt and grow in the garden. Yet there was no bitterness, and there is no doubt that there was love in that family. Randy's dad and uncle would laugh and laugh over things that they did as kids. They knew grief and hardship, but that wasn't all they knew. They also knew love from one another, they knew love and the kindness of their neighbors, and they knew God's love. God did not abandon the family in the midst of hard times and difficult situations. God never abandons us. Those events shaped the life of my father-in-law. He was the kindest, gentlest, most patient man you'd ever want to meet. He was hardworking, faithful, and generous, and he taught and passed down those traits to the next generations. He was a wonderful father and grandfather and was a blessing to his family. What family stories can you remember about difficulties your ancestors faced? How did they overcome? Where were the blessings? Where was God in the midst of it? How do their stories impact you today? Take some time to share your stories, and I'll be back in a little bit. Sometimes in our culture, we wonder why people can't simply get it all together. Why can't people pull themselves up by their own bootstraps? After all, we are managing to pay our bills, care for our children, get an education, get a job, and go to work. Why can't everyone do that? Once you learn about the causes of poverty and what it takes to get out, you find that it's not so easy after all. When you learn about mental illness and the struggle others go through, you may come to realize that you are where you are because you won the genetic lottery. When we remember those wandering Arameans in our family tree, those who struggle so hard, it calls us to have compassion on those who are struggling right now. When I think of how hard Letty, as a single mother, had to work to support her children, it makes me compassionate for those who are now struggling to raise a family on their own and to make ends meet. I think about how much a food pantry could have helped Letty, and it makes me want to make sure people have enough to eat. When I think of all the grief that she faced, it makes me want to have compassion for those who are sad. When I think of how even her own kids, when they were young, made fun of her for her broken English, it gives me a heart for those who are immigrants and who are English language learners now. This week, remember with all your heart. Remembering fills us with gratitude so that we want to share the blessings we have received. Remember what God has done for your ancestors and what God continues to do for you. Then think about what God wants to do through you. Whose burden can you make lighter? How will you share those blessings? Whatever you decide to do, do it with all your heart.